I can say, because my most recent experience was with Yahe. And
that must be overwhelming.
It was incredibly powerful experience.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful and,
Wow.
and compelling in every way. And again, this sense of a presence and of communication. And I realize as I'm saying this to you, Jesse, that I am handing yet another stick to my critics to beat me with.
No.
Because that's one of the things that they do, is that they drug shame me. They say that because Hancock has taken ayahuasca, this is why he comes up with all these crazy ideas about the past.
Well, the truth is,
anything that works to shut somebody down, they will use.
It goes to like this epistemological argument of, you somehow can't learn anything through intuition in the modern day for it to be valid.
Yeah.
You have to like piece it together through pure inductive rational logic, which is not how anybody operates. It's not even how rationalists operate if they audit themselves.
It's not. There's a real place for intuition and imagination.
Absolutely.
And that place, that's what archaeology in particular has tried to drive out, and most sciences have tried to drive out.
You look at the epiphenomena of science itself, the most productive science comes through dreams and revelations and downloads. There's actually a great book by Professor Jimena Canales called Bedeviled about the history of demons in science.
How interesting.
Maxwell had a demon, Descartes had a demon, Laplace had a demon, all these guys who are literally building the science and tech that push humanity forward, that all these kind of nitpicky, current physicists or whatever, are building off of now, had these sort of revelatory downloads.
Stuff that came out of altered states of consciousness.
Absolutely. I know you brought up Francis Crick and the double helical structure of DNA.
That's right. And Kerry Mullis,
Kerry Mullis, Kerry Mullis saw an alien too.
So it's time actually that, and I'm glad to say that that's what's happening at Imperial and at UCSD, is that science is beginning to take these experiences seriously, rather than just dismiss them of our brain on drugs.
And it's so beautiful to see science merge with, honestly, ancient traditions. Because if you look at St. Thomas of Aquinas, he had an angel hierarchy. You look at the Syrian Neoplatonist Iamblichus, he had an angel hierarchy. And you see these people mapping the spirit world via DMT, and you have these various beings. And I think a really interesting project, maybe in a year or two, once we get some more data, is how do those line up to some of these ancient Kabbalistic traditions?
Definitely, that's what needs to be done. And again, science just has to get over its hang-up about intuition and about altered states of consciousness, and unfortunately it's beginning to do so, and we're seeing some real solid scientific work being done. I mean, I personally would not like to be in an MRI scanner while on a DMT drip, but that's one of the things that they're doing.
Do you think, the curse of King Tut's tomb? This idea that like anybody that, you had a couple people try to x-ray it and then they sort of die mysteriously. Do you have any sort of take on that? Because I was looking it up today. I was like, I'm going to ask Graham about this. And, originally it was like this like mysterious metaphysical thing. And now the answer that like you read online is like, well, it's like uranium, like coming from like the local geology, like the rocks or something. And I'm like, that's not a satisfactory answer. Like, that's very interesting in and of itself. And actually, in a lot of sites where people claim to interact with the spirit world or aliens, even in a modern context, a la Skinwalker Ranch, they say that there's like a lot of uranium around. And there's radioactive substances around. And you can think of the Ark of the Covenant as maybe a product of the same thing.
I specifically looked into that in my book about the Ark.
So is there some connection via, and then you have this connection via, there's actually a great book written by a guy named Robert Hastings about, and this is like the modern UFO kind of craze or whatever, but it's about how UFOs consistently show up around nuclear bases all over the US. There's something about nuclear that also represents a portal. There's like a few ways out of the simulation. It's like the consciousness protocols, and then there's like something around nuclear.
Well, again, let's go back to what Pablo said, vehicles for entering and leaving the spirit world. When a shaman speaks of the spirit world, he's just that close to a quantum physicist speaking of parallel dimensions. The spirit world is just another word for a parallel dimension, which is an idea that again is gaining currency in the world today. So I'm very interested in the ongoing UFO revelations that are taking place. It's not been central to my work over the years. I've never felt that I've never felt particularly attracted to the ancient alien hypothesis in its nuts and bolts form, where aliens are supposed to have crossed interstellar space and built the pyramids. I do believe that a lost human civilization is the best answer to that problem. But the question is, what inspired that? And I think it was experiences in altered states of consciousness and definite encounters. There's no doubt now, nobody, no matter how rational they think they are, can dispute that large numbers of people under the influence of ayahuasca and straightforward DMT are having encounters with sentient beings, or what they interpret as sentient beings. The only question is, what are those things? What are those beings? And I think that there are two parallel tracks of research here. One is the nuts and bolts parallel, and the one is the consciousness parallel. And it's only when both are embraced that we're going to get to a solution to this.
Do you think that
I think the nuts and bolts idea that physical aliens are here, and they've got here in kit that's just a bit more sophisticated than our space rockets. That doesn't work for me. But a much more deeply mysterious idea, which may have inspired many ancient civilizations, I'm open to that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's not quite just this, next step in space travel. It's clearly something more.
And the showing up around nuclear bases, that's interesting. I mean, if you have if you have a culture like ours, global technological civilization, we've been given by the universe an amazing gift, planet Earth. We've been allowed the opportunity to live out our lives through multiple generations on this planet. What a gift to give us. Are we repaying that gift properly when we indulge in mutual destruction? When we even have a word for it called mutually assured destruction. Where, if you nuke me, even though I'm dead, my submarines are going to nuke you and wipe you out. This is childish behavior. This is the behavior of unhinged teenagers who have at their disposal the power of gods, which is what nuclear weapons are.
That's right.
And if there is any oversight in this vast, mysterious universe that we are only just beginning to understand, if there is any oversight, that oversight might well take an interest in the possession of the power of gods by crazed teenagers, which is what all the leaders of the world today are. I have no respect for any single leader in the world today. I don't care what party they're from. I don't care what country they're the leader of. I don't have respect for any of them. They're not leaders, they're misleaders. They're pursuing their own agendas and deceiving the public in order to get support behind those agendas. We need a whole new way to function in the world if humanity is going to continue as a species. If anybody cares about that, and I certainly do, I have 9 grandchildren. I don't want them to grow up in a world that's suddenly devastated by a nuclear holocaust because of the stupidity, the idiocy, the irresponsibility, and the macho attitudes of these teenagers in old bodies who are running the world.
Well, yeah, that was beautiful. That was amazing. Robert J. Oppenheimer, who's the father of fission bombs and sort of arguably created this calamitous world that we're in, but was a very complex character and regretted it immediately afterwards. There was a rumor that, we'd have to, collect the exact provenance on this. I'll disclaim to the audience, I don't know for sure if this happened, but a student of his was rumored to come up to him and said, you've created the first atom bomb, how do you feel? And he said, I've created the first atom bomb in modern history. And if you look back at the Bhagavad Gita and you look back at like the Vedas and a lot of, Hindu traditions, it's descriptions of these sort of crazy death weapons that seem to,
I may not quote the line correctly, but it roughly, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Yes.
I still get a tingle when I repeat that. There's wisdom passed down to us from the past. As far as I know, we're the first human civilization that had the power of nukes. But what do we really know about the deep and ancient past? There's so much that may be missing. It's not clear. But what I do know is within the civilizations and even the notion of a lost civilization that I've been pursuing, I think we're the first to have embraced these horrific weapons, whereby a planetary apocalypse can be brought upon us by our own behavior, where we can actually do it to ourselves, where we don't need that gigantic solar outburst, or we don't need to be hit by multiple pieces of a disintegrating comet. We're so stupid and so irresponsible that we'll just do it to ourselves. We're so tribal that we regard our particular tribe as having a right to wipe out other tribes. This has to change if there's to be any future for humanity.
Do you think that the veil is thinning, and simultaneous to multipolar nuclear world that's on the brink, we're also sort of commensurately waking up?
Yeah, I do. I think the only hope is an elevation of consciousness. And that has to be across a wide range of the population. No dictator comes to power without a substantial mass of the population supporting that dictator. They don't just seize power. They're manifesting a particular impulse within society. And that impulse comes from low consciousness, a very low state of consciousness. And I would say that my comment on leaders a moment ago, I would say those who are leading the world or misleading the world today are at the lowest possible state of consciousness that a human being can have, and how tragic it is that they're running the world. Consciousness change will be what saves us, if it can happen fast enough. If more and more people wake up and realize the predicament we've put ourselves in, and realize that we're all fellow human beings sharing this journey on this amazing garden of a planet, voyaging through the universe. And we need to look after each other and look after ourselves. Great power brings great responsibility. We should not use that power for destruction. We should use it for building and for construction. If people are in a more difficult condition than we are, we should help them get out of that condition. We shouldn't kill them off.
That's beautiful. Do you remember when we talked about the Teos Cave? Are you familiar with that?
I am, yeah. I've never really followed that up much, except it's becoming more and more obvious. And again, I tried to look into this in season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, that the Amazon is a place of secrets, a great unknown. And the moment we start scratching the edges of that unknown, we find things that are stunning and awe-inspiring and just, we never conceived of them before. So the notion of, what is it, these gold tablets in the Teos caves?
Yeah,
it's Ecuador, if I recall correctly.
Exactly, at the edge of Ecuador, this cave that they claim to have ancient, what feels like an alien metallic artifacts. It's like there's a library actually of these books. And the interesting thing is, I've always found this to be the most interesting thing about the Teos Cave, is that, because who knows whether it exists, but Neil Armstrong went to the moon. He comes back. He acts kind of weird, to be honest, by just objective accounts, and says some interesting things. And then in the next expedition he goes on has nothing to do with space. It's to this cage at the edge of the Amazon, which is rumored to have these sort of alien artifacts, and he brings this BBC film crew in with him in 1975. And
I want to watch that documentary.
Yeah, right? Well, it's online. I'll send it to you. Yeah,
please.
Yeah.
And what happened?
He didn't find it. But I'm in touch with this guy who claims that his father led Neil Armstrong down the wrong path.
Yeah.
So, and then we had a call with him, and you were like, I don't think that's going to happen. Like, you were like, I don't think you guys have the answer to this. And so, but who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
Is there a place where, like, if you had just infinite money, is there a place you would look now that you think is the most productive? Or do you think it is the Amazon? Do you think it's lidering the Amazon forest?
No, it's more than one place.
Okay.
And I've tried to draw attention to this through my work. The reason that I'm interested in the idea of a lost civilization at all is because of these astonishing shared symbols and ideas that are found all around the world, this shared knowledge, the same idea of what happens after death and so on. That's the where my curiosity has driven me to inquire into this possibility at all. And I have very definite reasons for inquiring into this possibility. But I'm often accused of presenting what they call a God of the gaps argument. When I say that there are certain very important parts of the world that archaeologists have never really looked in properly at all. That's not a God of the gaps argument. I'm arguing the case for a lost civilization because of a mass of evidence that has led me to the conclusion that there is a forgotten episode in the human story, and that it manifests through very many shared ideas and influences all around the world. But the gaps are not just any old gaps. The gaps are the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert, yeah, there's been some archaeology, but it's pretty minimal. I think if we want to get into the origins of ancient Egyptian civilization, we're going to have to start looking at what the Sahara was doing during the Ice Age. Indeed, we're going to have to start looking at what a lot of places were doing in the Ice Age. The Sahara, about 9 million square kilometers, hardly touched by archaeology. I'm not saying there's no archaeology, but it's minimal. I would like to see a much more expanded investigation of the entire Sahara Desert, which we know was green and fertile and a great place for people to evolve a civilization.
Do you know Jimmy Corsetti?
I know Jimmy. Yeah.
So what's your?
Jimmy.
So it's like you.
I'm not into the Eye of the Sahara.
The Richard Strucker.
The Richard. I'm not into it. I'm not going to write it off completely.
Yeah.
I get that the ring structure resembles how Plato described Atlantis. But it's premature for me to pronounce on that because I've never been there.
Well, you think Atlantis was possibly in North America. Randall Carlson thinks maybe it was in the Azores in Portugal.
I think the Azores is a very interesting potential, but I think it was more than one place.
Okay.
I think it was a civilization that precisely occupied the places that were very hospitable during the Ice Age, which are not accessible or not hospitable now. The Sahara Desert is one of those. The Amazon rainforest is another. The submerged continental shelves that were above water during the Ice Age are now underwater. Again, the Amazon, the Sahara Desert, the submerged continental shelves, none of them have had enough research done to say, oh, there was definitely no lost civilization. We have to do more research. Those gaps on their own wouldn't be enough, but it's the curiosity, it's the clues, it's the mysteries, it's the enigmas from the past that archaeology does not explain that motivate the quest for a lost civilization of the past. And then when we ask ourselves, when I ask myself, what are the most likely places that we're going to find the hard evidence for that? Those are the places precisely where archaeology hasn't looked enough. Well, and where they are looking, like in the Amazon, as I show in season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse, where they are looking, they're finding extraordinary mysteries. They're finding that the Amazon was once populated by tens of millions of people, that they were able to feed themselves, that there were huge cities in the Amazon with permanent populations, that there are enormous geometrical earthworks, very precise on an enormous scale, which actually can only be seen in full form from an aerial view. And yet there they are.
And that's an example of stories that you've heard 16th, 15th century explorers seeing these things, driving your research, and then you corroborating those stories. And if you were to a priori discount those stories, you wouldn't be able to figure this stuff out. And you're doing real scientific work.
That's right. And that's one of the differences between me and archaeologists is that they do a priori discount those stories. And yet when those stories are ground truthed, as has been the case in the Amazon, with the introduction of LiDAR technology, those stories turn out to be true.
Absolutely. Well, I would bet on everything you're saying because, archaeology is 200 years old, and the history of archaeology is the history of human civilization getting older. So I think it's actually an easy base case bet to just say, you're probably right.
Well, I wouldn't go so far, but what I would say I'm probably right on is that it's worth approaching the past with a much more open mind.
Absolutely. Well,
whether I'm right in everything that I say, that's another matter.
Of course.
It's one of the areas where my archaeologists' enemies or friends constantly misrepresent me, because they misrepresent me as somebody who's saying, I've proved the existence of a lost civilization. I have never made such a claim. I am following my curiosity, and I hope that readers and viewers will take that journey with me and will see the inspiration of the past and will do their own work on it. This is a work in progress. I am nowhere near proving the existence of a lost civilization, just like they are nowhere near proving the non-existence of such a thing.
But you're breaking. Look, everybody who watches Ancient Apocalypse grew up reading in a textbook that people crossed the Bering Strait in a specific time period in the Ice Age. There were no people in North America before that. And you're showing footprints. And so it's like
from 23,000 years
right
ago.
So like that's important, you know. That's
whereas the old model said that the Americas weren't inhabited by humans until just 13,500 years ago or less. Fortunately, that old model is out of the window now.
Right.
But what is still facing severe opposition from archaeology, you really have to nail everything down to such a point that they actually can't dismiss it before they begin to accept it. And those footprints in New Mexico, 23,000-year-old human footprints in New Mexico, which are interspersed with footprints of mammoths and mastodons and giant sloths and all the extinct megafauna of the Ice Age, they actually have been dated. You can't date the footprint, but you can date seeds that are embedded within them. And those seeds, it's been done multiple times now. Even the most hostile archaeologists can't reject it any longer. Those footprints are 23,000 or maybe a bit older. But what is still not accepted by the majority of archaeologists is even much older evidence for humans in the Americas, going back as much as 130,000 years into the past, 10 times older than the supposed first inhabitation of the Americas as it was held by archaeologists till just a few years ago.
Another great example, I think, is 65, 70 million years ago, the asteroid impact theory wiping out dinosaurs. That was presented by Luis Walter Alvarez.
Yes.
Who's a character in Christopher Nolan's, you know, Oppenheimer movie, because he was instrumental in creating nuclear fission and the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And he came up with this theory. It was totally castigated by the archaeology community, and now
it was Lewis and his son Walter. They were both subjected to humiliating attacks by many other scientists. And interestingly, they were relying initially on the same data that I've been criticized for saying data. Apparently, in America, you say data.
Yeah, but that's okay. I think anybody watching would make the adjustment live in their head.
Yeah, they were initially relying on what are called impact proxies. They didn't have a crater. This was one of the reasons why their critics found it so easy to dismiss them. They said, "Where's the crater?" You know, if you're talking about wiping out an entire clade of creatures, all the dinosaurs go overnight, there must be a crater, and there isn't one. But they said, no, we don't need a crater because we've got the proxies which prove that there was a huge impact. We've got the melt glass, we've got the carbon microspherules, we've got the trinitite, we've got the shocked quartz. You know, we've got evidence all over the world of a boundary layer that testifies to this. But it still wasn't accepted until they found the crater. These are which is the Chicxulub crater, deeply buried in the Gulf of Mexico. It's the same argument that's being used to reject the notion that there was impacts with and air bursts from a series of objects of a disintegrating comet, the debris trail of a disintegrating comet, roughly 12,800 years ago. That's the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. At the moment, the prime evidence for that is exactly the same impact proxies that Lewis and Walter Alvarez were offering for their theory, which eventually proved to be completely correct. Right. And I think it will be the same with the Comet Research Group and their work on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Well, I pray all the amazing work you're doing, all the amazing consciousness work you're involved in as well, that moves faster than whatever torrid meteor stream shower we might be hitting as an Earth. Yeah. And it's been an absolute honor to sit down with you, Graham.
Thank you.
It's always a blast. And really, we really appreciate everything you've done.
Total pleasure. I always enjoy talking to you as well, Jesse. I remember our last conversation very well, and it was a great pleasure. So thank you for having me on the show again.